After his partner's birthday party, Julian Thorne returned home. As the clock struck midnight, the hallway light cast a sharp glow on his handsome, cold face, a face tinged with the scent of alcohol and a strange perfume. He gently pushed open the bedroom door and saw Evelyn Reed sitting by the window, her long black hair cascading down her back, her expression placid to the point of being emotionless. But before I continue, if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please hit the subscribe button and leave a comment letting us know which city you're watching from in the US. This helps us see how far our story can spread. In his hand was a small, velvet box. Inside was the most exquisite diamond bracelet he had just custom-ordered from a renowned jeweler in New York. He approached her, his voice deep but intentionally soft. "For you. I thought it would suit you." She looked up, her eyes as deep and still as a lake. Glancing at the bracelet, she smiled, a smile so faint it was impossible to tell if it was genuine or merely the reflex of someone who had forgotten how to feel. "It's beautiful," she said, her tone as neutral as if she were commenting on an item in a store. He nodded slightly, thinking she had forgiven him. She remained silent, watching him walk into the bathroom. As the sound of the shower started, she stood up, picked up the box, and held the bracelet under the light. It sparkled so brightly it hurt her eyes. Without a moment's hesitation, she opened the lid of the trash can beside the vanity and dropped the box inside. The small clink was just loud enough to make the silent room feel frozen. Outside, the rain began to fall, each drop hitting the windowpane, mingling with the sound of the biting wind. She stood still, watching her reflection in the glass. The woman in the reflection seemed fragile, but her eyes held a bottomless abyss. Each gift he gave was another knife he twisted in her heart. Each apology was another layer of ash covering the memory of the days they were in love. She had once loved him to the point of losing herself. She had waited for him in the rain, cried until she couldn't breathe when he didn't come home. But one day, the pain became too much, and her heart turned hollow. The woman he had betrayed was no longer the girl of the past, but an empty shell who knew how to smile. The bathroom door opened. He walked out, saw her with her back to him, and spoke softly, as if afraid to break the silence. "Evelyn, you don't like it?" She didn't turn around, her reply indifferent. "Does it matter if I like it or not?" Julian froze for a moment. Her eyes in the darkness were like two thin, sharp, cold blades. He said nothing more, only sighed and stepped forward to embrace her from behind. The warmth felt foreign, artificial. "I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. This is the last time." She smiled, a barely perceptible curve of her lips. "You've said that many times before." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the rain and the ticking of the clock. He couldn't see the look in her eyes, a look filled with exhaustion, disillusionment, and a profound secret. He didn't know that at that very moment, in the fortified basement beneath their mansion, people were addressing her as General Reed, a figure commanding respect in both financial and military circles. She slipped from his embrace and walked toward the window, watching the rain fall like a silver curtain. "You should go to bed. I still have work to do." Julian nodded slightly, mistaking it for forgiveness. As he turned away, she glanced at the box, already buried beneath discarded tissues and cigarette ashes. The sparkle of the diamonds was gone, smothered. Outside, the rain grew heavier, and the wind rattled the window panes. She closed her eyes and whispered, as if to herself, "You remember to give me gifts, but you never gave me your heart." And from that moment, Evelyn Reed knew that the woman who once loved him to exhaustion had died a long, long time ago. Lately, Julian Thorne had been coming home very late. Extended meetings, networking events, or vague reasons he no longer bothered to explain. And Evelyn Reed, as usual, would be sitting in the living room reading a book, a cup of tea beside her long since gone cold. Every time she heard the sound of his car pulling into the driveway, she would lift her head slightly, her gaze empty of jealousy or anger, as vacant as a winter lake. She knew he had another woman. The entire company knew. The name Chloe Vance was whispered in every rumor. A young, beautiful secretary with a sweet voice and eyes that knew how to charm a man. The secretly taken photos, the intimate glances, the times they were seen leaving a hotel together, it was all as clear as day. But Julian had never admitted it. He remained silent, treating it as a trivial matter. And she remained silent, a habit that had become a callus on her heart. That night, he returned drunk, the reek of alcohol and cheap perfume clinging to him. Evelyn looked up, her eyes calm. He walked over, perhaps out of drunkenness, perhaps out of guilt, and bent down to kiss her unexpectedly. His lips were hot, but his breath was cold. She didn't respond, standing as still as a stone statue. When he pulled away, his breathing heavy, he touched her cheek. "Evelyn, I know I'm wrong, but I still want you to believe me. It's just that there are so many things out there that make me tired." She looked at him, her gaze so cold it was heart-stopping. "You don't need to pretend to atone," she said softly, her voice steady and unwavering. "I don't need gifts." Julian froze as if he'd been struck. He took half a step back, struggling to keep his voice even. "Then what do you need?" Evelyn pressed her lips together, her gaze piercing his, making him feel as if she could see into the very depths of his soul. "An honest heart," she replied, her voice low but each word clear. "But that, unfortunately, is something you don't possess." The room fell silent. Outside the window, the rain continued to fall, each drop hitting the railing with a lonely sound. He wanted to say something, but the words caught in his throat. She turned and walked into her study. He watched her go, seeing only her slender silhouette disappear into the cold light, so distant and unattainable he could no longer reach her. Julian sank into a chair, his hand on his forehead. When had they become two parallel worlds? He lived amidst lies and temptation, while she was submerged in silence and pride. He had once thought she was just an obedient, forgiving wife, but now she frightened him. He feared her silence, feared the disbelief in her eyes, feared the day she would disappear before he had a chance to hold on. In the study, Evelyn opened her laptop. A classified message appeared on the screen. "Operation Hexagon, Phase 2, initiated. Awaiting General's confirmation." She quickly typed a few characters, her face impassive, her eyes glowing in the monitor's light. Outside the door, Julian remained oblivious. Just a thin door separated him from the woman he thought was fragile, the woman who could make the political world tremble. A moment later, he walked to the door and knocked. "You're not asleep yet?" She didn't turn around. "I have work. You should get some rest too." He stood there, looking at her back, wanting to go in and hold her but stopping himself. An invisible distance made his feet feel heavy. That night, he lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady, quiet rhythm of her breathing, which felt a million miles away. He didn't know that in her dreams, he had been dead for a long time. There are men who think they have everything, until they realize the one thing they've lost was the only person who was ever truly sincere. And there are women who love to their very core. But when they fall silent, it means they have no desire to love ever again. Outside, the city was shrouded in night. A marriage was still lit, but it was as cold as ashes. After that night, Julian began to notice a change in his wife. No more breakfast together, no more conversations, however bland, that still held a trace of warmth. She spoke less, and her gaze grew sharp, as if forged from steel. Sometimes, a single glance from her was enough to silence him. It felt as if the person across from him was no longer the wife he knew, but someone else entirely powerful, dangerous, and distant. She started going out more often. Whenever he asked, she would reply curtly, "Work." But what kind of work, he didn't know. The passcode on her phone changed constantly. He once tried to follow her private car, but halfway there, a black SUV appeared and forced him to turn. The driver, wearing dark glasses, bowed his head politely but firmly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne. Mrs. Thorne has a private matter to attend to. It is not convenient for you to follow." The polite words sent a chill down his spine. She had her own security detail. The man was tall and silent, with a stern gaze, always walking half a step behind her. Every time Julian saw them, he felt a surge of irritation. He wanted to ask, but when he looked into her calm eyes, all his questions died in his throat. One afternoon, Julian left a meeting early and decided to tail her car. It left downtown Manhattan, turning onto quiet roads heading upstate, toward a military installation that had been decommissioned for years. He kept his distance, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. Her car stopped in front of a tall building. The brick walls were old, but it was heavily guarded. Electric fences, surveillance cameras, armed guards, it was nothing like an abandoned site. She stepped out, her face cold and resolute, swiped a card through a scanner, and walked inside without looking back. He parked a short distance away, got out, and crept closer, trying to peer through the gate. A large steel plaque hung by the entrance. Classified. Level 5 clearance required. Unauthorized personnel prohibited, Julian started. Beside the entrance was a list of authorized personnel. In bold letters at the very top was the name, General Reed, Alpha Priority. His entire body went rigid. General Reed. He read it again and again, his eyes glued to the name. Reed. Evelyn Reed. His heart hammered in his chest, a dizzying sensation spreading through him. Impossible. The gentle woman who stayed home making tea, reading books, and waiting for him was a general? A title that made even high-ranking officials bow in respect, a power far beyond his imagination. He stumbled back to his car and collapsed into the driver's seat. Images of her flashed through his mind, every cold glance, every moment of silence, every indifferent reply. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, and the picture they formed terrified him. She wasn't just his wife, she was hiding an entire world behind her back. Julian took a deep breath, started the car, and drove away, but a question echoed in his mind. Who was she? What had she been doing all these years? And why had she chosen to live beside him, a man she no longer even trusted? That night, when she returned, he was waiting in the living room, the dim yellow light casting shadows on his dark face. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse. "Meeting a client," she replied, taking off her coat without looking at him. "What kind of client requires armed security?" He sneered, his eyes cold. She paused for half a second, then turned to face him with a thin smile, her eyes sharp as a razor. "Julian, were you investigating me?" He fell silent. For a moment, the air between them froze. The light reflecting in her deep, cold eyes made him feel an involuntary shiver of fear. She stepped closer, leaned in, and whispered by his ear, "You've betrayed me countless times. Don't I have the right to a few secrets of my own?" With that, she turned and walked away. The faint scent of her perfume lingered, leaving him motionless in his chair. There are men who don't fear betrayal, only to realize too late that the person they look down on was 1,000 times stronger than them. And there are women who, when they fall silent, have already entered a world that men can no longer reach. Outside, the night wind rustled the curtains. Julian clenched his fists. In the darkness, he knew that from now on, nothing would ever be the same. That night, Julian sat in his study, the light from his computer screen illuminating a face etched with fatigue, confusion, and a fear he had never known. The dossier he had just received from a confidential source lay on his desk. It was titled Operation Tempest, and on it was a name that made his heart stop, Reed. The signatory for the commander role was Evelyn Reed. He gripped the file so tightly that the veins on his hands stood out. Impossible. His wife, the woman he had thought was soft, gentle, and long-suffering, was the head of a clandestine force with the most significant influence in the region. His hand trembled as he recalled that evening, watching her walk into the military compound, her expression cold and unwavering. The guards had bowed to her, while he, her unfaithful husband, could only watch from behind a fence like a stranger. Julian let out a dry, hollow laugh that echoed in the silent room. So, the wife he had always considered the weaker one was the one who held the power of life and death. While he was busy chasing a young secretary, she was commanding men in uniform, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. He opened another file. A line in the report hit him like a lightning bolt. Operation Tempest, 5 years ago. Objective: rescue of a group of business executives taken hostage after a plane crash on the northern border. A blurry photo in the report showed his own face. Beneath the photo, a cold, concise note. Mission Commander, Evelyn Reed. Julian recoiled, his hand covering his mouth, his eyes wide with disbelief. 5 years ago, he had been one of the hostages rescued from a snow-covered forest. When he woke up in the hospital, he was only told that an anonymous military commander had led the Special Forces team. He had wanted to thank them but could never find out their identity. And now he knew. It was her, the woman he had betrayed. He remembered the first time he met her at a charity gala. She was gentle and quiet, with deep, soulful eyes. He had been drawn to her unusual calmness, thinking she was the kind of woman who would be content to stand silently behind a man. But now he understood. She had never stood behind anyone. Julian didn't sleep that night. He sat staring at their wedding photo on the wall, where she wore a white dress and a gentle smile. Now he wondered what was hidden behind that smile. Had he been just a part of her plan from the very beginning? Early the next morning, as she emerged from the dressing room in a simple white blouse, he looked at her with foreign eyes. "Who are you, really?" he asked, his voice raw. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "The person you once swore to love for the rest of your life." Then she turned away, her voice low but sharp. "Or, have you forgotten that vow?" He stood in silence, watching her silhouette disappear through the bright doorway. In his mind, only one unanswered question remained. If she had saved him all those years ago, why did she choose to silently watch him betray her now, coldly tossing his gifts into the trash? Perhaps there was another secret between them, a secret that would make him lose everything just to know the truth. That evening, the city was draped in a mist-like rain. Streetlights reflected off the shattered drops on the windowpane, mirroring Evelyn Reed's face cold, silent, and unnerving. Her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. It was a series of photos, Julian and Chloe Vance at a private party. He was leaning in, gently touching her hair, his eyes hazy with wine and temptation. Her finger paused for only a few seconds before she smiled, deleted everything, and felt nothing. No anger, no tears, just a cold emptiness spreading through her heart. She once thought that love meant accepting wounds, but some wounds, when repeated too often, become a habit, and that habit kills love. Julian came home late, the smell of alcohol and cheap perfume clinging to his clothes. He tried to act normal, approaching her and speaking softly. "I'm sorry, an unexpected meeting came up. I didn't have time to text you." She set her teacup down, her voice as light as fog. "Is that so?" That one phrase was enough to make him feel suffocated. No anger, no blame. It was more terrifying than any rage. He reached out to take her hand. "Don't misunderstand. There's nothing between me and Chloe." She looked down at his hand holding hers and gently pulled away. "Nothing?" Her voice was low, a faint smile on her lips. "Have you gotten so used to lying that you've started to believe it yourself?" He froze. There were no tears in her eyes, only the cold light of someone who had seen through everything. "Chloe is just my secretary." "You're misunderstanding," he insisted, his voice growing hoarse. "A secretary?" She laughed softly. What kind of secretary sends intimate photos to her boss's wife in the middle of the night? The room fell into a thick silence. Julian didn't answer, just stared at her, an unexplainable sense of dread rising within him. When had the woman before him become so impossible to grasp? When had he become unable to look her in the eye? She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. Her voice was slow, but sharp enough to cut his heart. "You know, Julian, every time you lied, I told myself to believe you one more time. But when there's no trust left, your lies are just a farce." He wanted to say something, but his throat was tight. She turned back, her expression terrifyingly calm. "I don't need you to confess. In my heart, everything is already clear. It's just one more stab wound." Julian stepped forward and pulled her into a tight embrace, like a man on the verge of losing everything. "Don't be like this, Evelyn. I just lost my way for a moment. I was wrong. I'll break things off with her." She let him hold her, not resisting, not pushing away, but not responding either. When he leaned down to kiss her, she said one sentence that made him freeze. "You have no right to kiss the person you betrayed." She walked away, leaving him alone in the living room where the diamond bracelet from the other night still lay in the trash. He saw it, its light reflecting on the floor like a glittering wound. That night, Julian sat up until morning. He began to wonder if, in this marriage, he wasn't the only one telling lies. Because sometimes, her eyes were so cold he believed she had stopped loving him a long time ago. But he didn't know that, in that moment, Evelyn was also sitting in her car, looking out at the rain-streaked street, whispering to herself, "Just one more knife wound is all it takes for this heart to stop feeling pain." That evening, Julian came home earlier than usual, a rare occurrence. He wanted to surprise her, to take her out to dinner as a way of making up for the recent coldness. But as he walked into the garden behind the mansion, the warm light from the living room spilled out, accompanied by the sound of clear, genuine laughter. Laughter he hadn't heard from her in a very long time. He stopped in his tracks. Inside, Evelyn was sitting across from Marcus Blackwood, her close friend and the CEO of a private military corporation. They were chatting, their eyes occasionally meeting, and she was smiling a soft, natural smile. In that moment, Julian felt the blood boil in his veins. She never smiled at him like that anymore, not the forced, cold smiles, but a smile of relaxation, comfort, a hint of tenderness mixed with the quiet confidence of experience, and it drove him mad. He strode into the room, his voice low and sharp. "Looks like you're having fun." The atmosphere instantly froze. Marcus stood up, smiling. "Mr. Thorne, it's been a while. I was just discussing something with Evelyn." "What?" Julian cut him off, his gaze like a blade. Evelyn set down her teacup, her voice calm. "It's work. He's overseeing a project in collaboration with the Department of Defense." "Work?" Julian smirked. "You seem to have so much free time that you have to meet with business partners yourself in the evening." Marcus started to say something, but she raised a hand to stop him. "You should go, Marcus," she said, her voice soft but her eyes firm. Marcus nodded slightly, said his goodbyes, and left. The moment the door closed, Julian grabbed her wrist, pulling so hard she winced. "Let go," she said coldly. He didn't let go. Instead, he pulled her flush against him, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his eyes bloodshot. "You're my wife. You're only allowed to look at me. Do you hear me?" She stared directly into his eyes, her gaze unwavering. "And you?" she said slowly. "Have you only looked at me?" The question hung in the thick air. He tightened his grip then, as if losing control, he bent down and kissed her. It was a wild, possessive kiss, as if trying to prove that she still belonged to him, that she hadn't escaped his grasp. But her response was icy silence. She didn't kiss back, nor did she resist, simply letting him kiss her as if to make him realize that no matter how much force he used, he could never reclaim her heart. Julian pulled away, breathing heavily, his forehead resting on her shoulder. "I can't stand seeing you with another man," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of jealousy and pain. "But you could stand being with another woman," she replied, her voice as soft as a whisper, yet each word was a dagger. He froze, silent. She pried his hand off her and slowly walked to the window, looking out at the dew-drenched garden. "Jealousy, Julian? Jealousy is a privilege for lovers, not for traitors." He stood silently behind her, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions. When had she become so strong that she could make him feel so small? He used to control everything, his company, his power, her heart. But now, the one thing he couldn't control was her love for him. She turned back, her voice steady. "If you truly want to keep me, don't use jealousy, use honesty. But unfortunately, you don't have that." She left, leaving him alone in a room that smelled of her perfume and his own fading, ragged breaths. Julian raised a hand to his lips, where the taste of their kiss lingered, a kiss that was both an assertion of ownership and an incurable wound. In the deep of the night, he let out a bitter laugh. "Evelyn Reed," he thought, "you're teaching me what it feels like to lose." That night, the sky over the city was shrouded in a thick fog. On the northern outskirts, within a top-secret military installation, white floodlights illuminated hundreds of soldiers standing at attention. The atmosphere was so solemn that even breathing felt heavy. On the ceremonial stage, a woman in a black dress uniform walked out, her posture erect, each step firm and decisive. When she removed her cap, her dark hair was tied in a high bun, and the cold light glinted off her sharp, resolute features. Evelyn Reed. People called her by a resounding title, General Reed. This was the first time in 10 years that her true identity had been publicly acknowledged in a classified ceremony, honoring her for commanding 3 major operations that saved hundreds of lives and for leading the nation's clandestine security network. Below, rows of high-ranking generals and corporate leaders sat in silence, none daring to breathe too loudly. Among them was Julian Thorne. He had been invited as a representative of a defense contracting corporation, but when he saw the person who walked onto the stage, he froze. In that instant, all sound in his mind vanished. His wife, the woman he thought only knew how to make tea, cook dinner, endure, and be silent, was the person who made the entire political establishment bow their heads. He stood up and took a few steps forward, his eyes never leaving her. She remained composed, her deep, steady voice echoing through the microphones. "We do not live to be praised, but to protect what we believe is right, even if the price we must pay is ourselves." Those words made Julian's heart clench. He remembered all the times she had silently endured, the nights he came home late, the gifts she threw in the trash. She didn't need gifts, she needed trust. Something that he, the man who had always given himself the right to love and to betray, had never given her. After the ceremony, he waited for her in an empty corridor. The sound of her heels echoed and then stopped right in front of him. "You really are General Reed," he said, his voice hoarse with a mixture of shock and pain. She looked at him, her gaze no longer the soft one of a wife, but the placid calm of someone who had walked through every kind of loss. "I have always been me. You just never bothered to look closely." He clenched his fists and then, unexpectedly, knelt before her, his voice choked. "Evelyn, why didn't you tell me? Why did you have to hide it from me?" She was silent for a long moment, then replied, her voice as soft as the wind, but every word stabbed him, "Because you weren't someone I could trust with the truth." The air froze. He looked up into her deep, cold eyes. "I thought I was strong, that I was protecting you, but it turns out you were the one protecting me all along." She turned away, her voice calm. 5 years ago, when your plane crashed, I was the one who commanded the rescue team. I saw you, unconscious and exhausted, but alive. In that moment, I promised myself I would protect you. Not out of duty, but out of love. But perhaps you never understood that." Julian lurched forward and grabbed her hand, his eyes filled with desperation. "I understand now, Evelyn. Don't leave me." She pulled her hand away, a flicker of sadness in her eyes, but her resolve was firm. "Julian, the man I loved died the first day you chose to lie. I don't need you to kneel. I just need you to know that once trust is broken, it can never be pieced back together." With that, she turned and walked down the long, cavernous hallway, her back straight and proud. Julian remained kneeling, his eyes stinging, his lips trembling as if he wanted to call her name, but no sound came out. He had thought he could keep her with money, with power, with the title of husband. But now he realized she was someone the entire world looked up to, while he was just a man left behind, clinging to his own shadow. And that night, as she walked away, he understood. This wasn't just the truth being revealed, it was the moment he lost her. Truly lost her. After the ceremony, Julian was sleepless for nights on end. The image of Evelyn in her uniform, her eyes cold and powerful, haunted him. The more he thought, the more it hurt. He realized he had never understood her, had never been worthy of her, but just as he was starting to want to make things right, the storm broke. Ever since her identity was revealed, international media, investors, and underground powers began to stir. A financial conglomerate named Orient Group, under the guise of economic partnership, was actually a network of technology and arms spies, and they had set their sights on her. The person behind Orient Group was none other than Chloe Vance. Julian discovered this from classified reports leaked within his own company. Every trail led back to Chloe, who had approached him from the beginning. methodically infiltrating his life to gather intelligence on military contracts associated with Thorn Industries contracts that were directly linked to Evelyn's projects. He remembered all their chance encounters, the orchestrated parties, the times he had gotten drunk and accidentally ended up with her. It had all been a setup. He opened a video file sent to his internal email. It was his own face, blurry but unmistakable, in a hotel room with Chloe. Beneath the video was a cold message. "If you don't sign the contract to transfer the military data, this video goes to Evelyn Reed." Julian's fists clenched, sweat beading on his forehead, so the betrayals that haunted him weren't entirely his choice. She had drugged him, set him up, and made him believe he was the guilty one, keeping him silent so she could manipulate him. But what shattered him most was not the video, but another classified report. It stated the final objective of the operation. Target: General Evelyn Reed. Collect data and eliminate. He shot up from his chair, raced out of his office, and called her dozens of times, but no one answered. Only then did he understand. She was in danger. That evening, at the city's western port, a convoy of military vehicles moved silently. Evelyn sat in the command vehicle, her gaze calm, holding a tactical map. She had received intel about a mole in her network, a leader in the corporate world collaborating with the military. She didn't know it was Chloe, and behind her was an international network ready to strike. As the convoy approached a secure point, a massive explosion erupted ahead. Flames lit up the night sky, and her vehicle was thrown, its windows shattering. Alarms blared. Evelyn was wounded on her forehead, blood trickling down her neck, but she remained conscious, giving orders into her radio. "East team, fall back, block the western route. We have a mole in the system." At the same time, Julian received a tip. General Reed's convoy had been ambushed at the port. He threw his phone down and sprinted to his car. For the first time in his life, he didn't think about his reputation, about money or power. He only knew he had to get to her. The street seemed endless. He drove like a madman through the night, his heart pounding. He remembered her words, "You weren't someone I could trust with the truth." Now, he wanted to prove that, even if it was late, he could still protect her. When he arrived at the scene, it was chaos. Gunfire, smoke, flames. He jumped out of his car and searched for her among the dozens of soldiers. Then he saw her. She was leaning against a concrete wall, a pistol in her hand, blood soaking her shoulder, her eyes still commanding and cold. "Evelyn!" he screamed, running toward her and pulling her behind the cover of a vehicle. She stared at him, stunned for a moment. "Julian, what are you doing here?" He gasped for breath, gripping her shoulders. "I know everything. It's Chloe Vance. She wants to kill you." A flicker of surprise and pain crossed her eyes. In that moment, amidst the smoke and fire, they looked at each other, no longer husband and wife, but two people who had lost each other, now standing together on the front line between life and death. But they both knew this battle wasn't over. The real enemy was still in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That night, the city was drenched in a torrential downpour, the rain so cold it felt like it could wash everything away: the sins, the shattered trust. Evelyn had just returned from the military hospital after the explosion. The wound on her shoulder still ached, but she didn't rest. She went straight into meetings, signing orders, making decisions as if physical pain was nothing compared to the scars on her heart. She thought he wouldn't come, but then, through the white curtain of rain, a figure appeared. It was Julian. His raincoat was torn, his eyes wild like someone who had walked through the depths of regret. She stood under the eaves of the base, watching him stop a few feet away. The dim light illuminated his face, thinner and paler now, with dark circles under his eyes. "I was wrong, Evelyn," he said, his voice raw from the rain and suppressed emotion. "Everything I did was wrong." She didn't answer, just looked at him for a long time. As the rain seemed to tear the sky apart, he took another step, his hand trembling. "I know what happened between me and Chloe was a setup. But even if I was framed, even if I was drugged, I still betrayed you. No one forced me to believe her. No one forced me to leave you. It was my own weakness. Punish me, Evelyn. Do anything you want. Just don't be silent with me like this." She let out a soft, heartbreaking laugh. Punish you? She asked, her voice hoarse. You don't understand, Julian. The greatest punishment is that I still love you. He froze, the rain blurring the lights around them. What did you say? She lifted her head, rainwater mixing with her tears. I tried to forget you. I thought I was strong enough to watch you with someone else, cold and detached. But every night, I dream of you. I see you walking out of the darkness, calling my name. She clenched her fists, her voice choked. And every time I wake up, I laugh at myself. I'm General Reed, the woman who makes politicians bow their heads, but with just one look from you, I become as weak as the girl I used to be. Julian stepped forward, but she retreated, maintaining a fragile distance. Don't come any closer. He stopped, his hands suspended in midair. Why? Because if you touch me, I won't be able to hold back. Her words tightened around his heart. The woman who had faced the world with an iron will was now trembling in the rain because of him. He let his hand fall, his voice thick with emotion. I don't need your forgiveness. I just need to be by your side, to do anything you want. Even if it means being a soldier under your command, I'll do it. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes a battleground between reason and emotion, between the commander and the woman who had loved so fiercely. Do you think one apology is enough? No, he answered, his voice firm. I know I lost you, and I may never get you back, but I won't give up. Even if you hate me, I will stand right here, in this rain, until you look at me again. She pressed her lips together and turned to walk away, but he didn't move. The rain lashed his shoulders, cold to the bone. Time seemed to stop, leaving only the sound of the storm and the choked breaths of two people who had once loved so deeply. Just as she was about to disappear into the rain, his voice, hoarse but desperate, called out, Evelyn, I lost you because I was afraid. But this time, even if I have to die, I won't let anyone touch you again. She paused, not turning back, her reply so quiet it almost dissolved in the rain. Don't make a promise you're not brave enough to keep. Then she was gone, leaving him standing in the downpour, alone but resolute. For the first time, he understood that true love wasn't about possession, but about taking responsibility for one's own mistakes. And as she walked away through the thunder and lightning, she knew that even if her heart still loved him, the battlefield ahead was far from quiet. Because in the darkness, Chloe Vance had not yet made her final move. That night, the sky over the city was ink black, heralding an impending storm. The military base where Evelyn worked was unnervingly quiet, so quiet that the wind whistling through the iron fences was audible. She had just finished a meeting with the Security Council. On the table lay the final plans to counter the international syndicate led by Chloe Vance. No one expected that, a minute later, everything would vanish in a deafening explosion. Smoke and dust billowed up like a hellfire, a crimson glow swallowing the night sky. Evelyn was thrown to the floor, her head spinning. Emergency alerts blared, sirens tearing through the silence. She scrambled to her feet, shouting, "Lock down the entire sector! Secure the classified data!" But just as she stood up, she saw a figure sprinting down the corridor toward her. It was Julian. He wore a black jacket, his breathing ragged, his eyes red with worry. "Evelyn," he yelled, rushing to pull her into a tight embrace. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, pushing him away. "This area is under attack." "That's exactly why I had to come." Gunfire erupted, glass shattering around them. She drew her pistol and ran with him down the hallway. It was chaos, smoke, fire, shouting. At a corner, they encountered a group of masked, armed soldiers. Without thinking, Evelyn pulled him behind cover as her pistol fired with cold precision. A bullet grazed her cheek, leaving a red streak. Panicked, he lunged forward to shield her. "Evelyn, be careful. Don't cover me," she yelled. "You're not a soldier." "I don't care." She turned to look at him, her eyes blazing. "Are you trying to die to atone for your sins?" He didn't answer, just pulled her away from another volley of bullets. They burst into the central control room. She worked frantically to disable the self-destruct system, sweat plastering her forehead. But then, another massive explosion rocked the room from behind. In that split second, before Evelyn could react, Julian threw himself at her, wrapping her in his arms and using his own body to shield her from the blast. The room flashed white-hot, then went dark. The concussive force threw them across the floor. When she opened her eyes, everything was smoke and flames. Julian lay collapsed beside her, his chest a mess of blood. A piece of shrapnel was embedded deep, blood seeping through his shirt. "No! Julian!" she screamed, pulling him into her lap. He opened his eyes, his lips trembling into a weak but gentle smile. "Finally, I got to protect you." "Shut up!" she sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "You are not allowed to die. Do you hear me? You owe me. You haven't paid me back yet." He raised a hand to gently touch her cheek, his gaze as deep as the night. "If there's a next life." His voice faltered, growing weaker. "I won't betray you again." A tear fell onto his lips, hot and bitter. She bit her own lip, choking back a sob. "There is no next life. There's only now. You have to live, because I haven't forgiven you yet." But his eyes fluttered closed, and he went limp in her arms, his breathing becoming terrifyingly shallow. The sound of rescue helicopters grew louder, their searchlights cutting through the smoke. She held him, lifted her head, and issued a sharp, clear command. "Get a medical team here now. Prepare for on-site surgery. I will not lose him, even if it costs me my own life." The night wind carried the stench of smoke and blood. In that moment, Evelyn Reed, the cold, formidable general of the nation, was just a desperate woman, cradling the man she loved in the ruins, whispering, her voice as hoarse as the wind, "Julian Thorne, you owe me a promise. Don't you dare before you keep it." Outside, the rain began to fall again, mixing with the smoke, the blood, and a pain too deep for words. That night, the base would be remembered as the night of terror. And for her, it was the only night in her life she begged for someone not to leave her. The military hospital was a blaze of light against the night, its emergency rooms glowing, its long corridors white, cold, and eerily silent. Outside, the rain fell relentlessly, each drop seeming to synchronize with the weak, faltering beat of the heart monitor in the operating room, a rhythm so fragile that a single misstep could silence it forever. Evelyn sat outside the OR, her blood-stained clothes stiff and dry, her hands ice-cold. Her empty gaze was fixed on the flashing red light above the door, as if staring into a bottomless abyss. The woman who had commanded hundreds of men and made life-or-death decisions in the most critical situations could do nothing now but wait. The surgeon's voice drifted from inside, punctuated by the clink of instruments. "We're losing him." Heart stopped, charging the defibrillator. She flinched but kept her eyes open. "Clear." The long, flat tone of the monitor echoed, then fell silent. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, drawing blood. Memories flashed through her mind like a disjointed film. His smile in the morning sun, the warmth of his embrace after an argument, and his final words before he lost consciousness, "If there's a next life, I won't betray you again." A doctor stepped out. His grim expression made her heart seize, but then he spoke softly. "He's alive. He made it." She sank to the floor, a trembling hand covering her mouth as tears fell, unchecked. She didn't wail or sob loudly, just wept in a silence that was more painful than any scream. Someone she had already buried in her heart. She was now terrified of losing all over again. 3 days later, he woke up. Dim light filtered through the window, illuminating his pale, weak face, but he was breathing. He turned his head, searching for her, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Evelyn? Where are you?" The room was empty, except for a small wooden box on the bedside table. Inside was his wedding ring and a neatly folded piece of paper. He opened it. The words made his hand tremble. "Julian, you were brought back to life, but I haven't been. After the explosion, I realized that some wounds can never be healed, not even with a life. I'm leaving, not because I hate you, but because I'm afraid. Afraid that if I stay, I'll forgive you again. Live the way I once hoped you would live with integrity. Evelyn Reed." He read each word as if his heart were being sliced apart. She had left without a goodbye, without a single tear, leaving only a cold farewell and a love that had never been properly buried. He clutched the ring, his lips moving silently. "You said you were afraid of forgiving me, but I'm afraid you'll never come back." Outside the window, the morning sun broke through the thick clouds. He stared into the distance, at the swaying trees, and remembered every look, every word, every time she had silently endured. Julian Thorne was no longer the arrogant CEO of years past. From the moment he survived, only one thing remained in his heart: atonement. He had loved her but never understood her. He had possessed her but then lost her. Now, his life pulled back from the brink of death. The battle he faced was not in the boardroom or with power, but with his own heart. He gently placed the ring on his chest, right over the bandaged wound, and whispered, "You can leave me, but I will never leave you. Even if I have to go to the ends of the earth, I will find you, Evelyn Reed." The morning light streamed through the blinds, casting stripes across his face. The once proud man was now left with nothing but a broken but determined heart. He had been resurrected, not just from the wound in his chest, but from the ashes of his own soul. Somewhere out there, Evelyn Reed still existed, cold and strong, but her heart was surely still bleeding, and he knew his journey to find her, to find that love again, had only just begun. 5 years passed, like a cold wind, sweeping away the glory, pride, and ambitions of a man who once stood at the pinnacle of power. Julian Thorne was no longer the CEO of Thorne Industries, a name that made the business world tremble. After recovering, he left the corporation, refusing every offer, every meeting, every handshake. He chose a life of seclusion in a small house overlooking the ocean, a place where she once said, "If I could, I'd leave it all behind for just the wind and the waves." He lived with a strange simplicity. Each morning, he would wake early, brew a cup of coffee, watch the sunrise, and then open the wooden box containing her wedding ring. The ring had dulled with time, but he polished it every day, as if tending to a wound that would never heal. No one knew that in that small room, he still kept the divorce papers, the paper now worn and creased with age, a corner stained with a dried speck of his own blood from the day he first touched it in despair. After the explosion, he never heard another word about her. All military records of General Reed were classified at the highest level. Every inquiry he made was met with the same answer. No such person exists in our records, he understood. She had removed herself from his world, completely and utterly, leaving no crack for him to slip back through. Until one winter afternoon, he was sitting in a small cafe, the television in the corner tuned to an international news channel. A ticker ran across the bottom of the screen. Global Security Alliance Summit opens in Geneva. Alliance head, General Evelyn Reed, makes her first public appearance in years. The coffee cup in his hand slipped and shattered on the floor. He looked up, and the image on the screen made his heart stop for several seconds. She was walking to a podium in a large auditorium, dressed in a black military uniform, her hair in a severe bun, her gaze firm and sharp. Camera flashes erupted around her. The press called her the iron symbol of a new era, but to him, she was still the woman who used to sit quietly by the window, smiling when he came home late. Still the woman who had coldly thrown his gift in the trash, but out of pain, not hatred. He sat frozen for a long time, every word she spoke from the screen stabbing him in the heart. She spoke of peace, of responsibility, of protecting humanity from war. Her voice was strong and calm, but in her eyes he could still see a flicker of loneliness, a flicker that suggested someone still occupied a corner of her heart. When the press conference ended, a reporter pushed forward. "General Reed, have you considered settling down?" She offered a faint smile. Some people, once they step onto the battlefield, find their hearts no longer belong to any one person, but to the sky. Julian let out a bitter laugh, a sound more saline than tears. "So, you always belong to the sky," he whispered. He turned off the TV and leaned back in his chair. In the quiet room, only the sound of the wind blowing in from the sea could be heard, a chill seeping through the cracks in the walls. He closed his eyes and pictured that moment 5 years ago, lying in her arms, whispering a promise of a next life. But there was no next life. There was only the present, where she stood before thousands, and he watched from afar, an outsider in the story of his own life. The world praised her as a legendary general, a woman who shifted the global balance of power. But he knew that behind the accolades was a heart that had been betrayed, broken, and had once been willing to die for the one she loved. Julian stood up, opened the door, and looked out at the ocean. The waves crashed rhythmically, like the long, slow sighs of time. He whispered, so softly only he could hear, "Evelyn, if you are the sky, then I will be the wind. Even if I can never touch you, I will always follow you, forever." A strong gust of wind blew past, carrying the salty tang of the sea and the scent of impending rain. He knew that perhaps fate had decreed it so. She would soar to great heights, while he could only stand on the ground and watch. But deep down, a part of him still believed that one day, among a crowd of thousands, her eyes would pause, and she would realize he had never left. The international conference took place in a glass building in the heart of the city. The lights reflected off her face, cold, authoritative, and distant. All eyes were on General Evelyn Reed, the woman who had just signed a strategic cooperation treaty between nations. No one knew that in that moment, her heart was trembling because of a familiar gaze in the sea of faces. In the back row, he stood silently. He was no longer the arrogant CEO, nor was he wearing an expensive suit. He was in a simple dress shirt, quietly watching the woman he had lost. When their eyes met, the world seemed to stop. He walked toward her, each step slow, his eyes filled with a subtle tremor. "It's been a long time," he said, his voice hoarse, as if carrying the weight of 5 years of waiting and regret. She offered a faint smile, light as a passing breeze. "Yes, a very long time." Her reply was calm, but her eyes couldn't hide the flicker of emotion. Between them were hundreds of watching eyes, the distance of two different worlds, one who had fallen to the lowest point, one who had risen to the highest peak. But in that shared glance, all titles and distances dissolved. "I used to think," he said softly, "that if I ever got the chance to see you again, I would give you a proper apology. But now, standing in front of you, I can't seem to say anything at all." She looked straight at him, her voice low. "You don't need to apologize. Everything is in the past." She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist, his grip trembling and desperate. "Don't say it's in the past. It's been 5 years, but I still haven't forgotten you. Every day, I relive that moment, the moment you left and I was too late to stop you." She took a slow breath and pulled her hand away. "You once had everything you needed to keep me, but you chose to believe someone else. Now, I am no longer your woman." Her voice was cold, but her eyes were shimmering. The emotions suppressed for 5 years were a tidal wave threatening to break. The entire hall seemed to fall silent. He looked at her, his gaze softening. "You've changed so much. But just by looking at you, I know there's still a corner of your heart that belongs to me." She turned away, neither confirming nor denying it. A single tear fell onto the dossier she was holding. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the glass panes like the rhythm of fate. They walked out of the conference hall together and stood under the awning in the light drizzle. "If time could turn back," he asked quietly, "would you still have chosen to leave?" She was silent for a long time, then smiled sadly. "It wasn't that I chose to leave, it was that you made it impossible for me to stay." The words were like a knife twisting in his heart. The rain grew heavier, soaking the shoulders of their clothes. He made no move to shield himself, just looked at her as if trying to engrave her image into his memory one last time. She began to walk away, leaving him standing alone in the gray rain. The streetlight cast his face in shadow and light, just like his heart still in love, but no longer with the right to be by her side. And as she walked, each step heavy, a small voice echoed in her mind. "Seeing you again, it turns out, hurts just as much as the first day." The conference room door closed with the sigh of the wind. Before she could turn, he was there. His eyes burned with an intensity that felt like fire. A second later, he pulled her forcefully into his arms, his lips crashing down on hers in a fierce, searing kiss, as if trying to reclaim all the lost years. It wasn't the kiss of a powerful CEO or a repentant traitor, but the kiss of a man who had lost everything and was now clinging to hope with only his breath and his desperation. She struggled, her hands pushing weakly against his chest, but then her resistance faded. In that moment, her own heart was in turmoil. She had thought that after so much pain, she had turned to stone. But with this one kiss, the cracks she thought had sealed were splitting wide open. He slowly released her, their foreheads touching, their breaths mingling. His voice trembled. I don't need my reputation. I don't need power. I don't need anyone's respect. I just need to love you, even if it's just one more time, even if it costs me this entire life. She stood motionless, a single tear falling into the silence between them. For 5 years, she had built an empire, become someone no one dared to offend. But hearing his voice, she was once again the woman who had sat vigil outside an emergency room for him all night. Julian, she whispered, her voice choked, I am not your wife anymore. Her eyes were cold, but her heart ached so much she could barely breathe. I am a general. I carry the lives of thousands on my shoulders. My decisions cannot be driven by emotion. Do you understand? He looked at the woman before him, no longer gentle, no longer fragile, but a cold, proud commander. And yet, it was that very pride that made him love her more, made him yearn to touch her, not to possess her, but to atone. He gently took her hand and placed it over his heart. I know you don't trust me anymore, but this heart hasn't stopped beating for you for 5 years. Every day I've lived has been for the chance to say this to you. She closed her eyes. Images of the explosion, of blood and smoke, of his voice whispering her name, all came rushing back. Her heart trembled, but her mind screamed, No, you should go, she said, her voice almost a plea. Between us, love is not enough to save the world, and I cannot make thousands of people pay the price for one man. He looked at her for a long time, his eyes filled with love, pain, and absolute respect. Then he nodded and slowly let go of her hand. I understand, but I will still be here. Not as your ex-husband, but as a soldier, ready to protect his general, even if you never forgive me. She pressed her lips together and turned away. A tear fell onto the shoulder of her uniform. Outside, the rain continued its gentle patter against the glass, like the sound of 2 hearts beating in silence. That kiss, the kiss of a man who had lost everything, was both an apology and a promise. From now on, he would love her only in silence, like someone standing behind the light, watching a star that would never be his. On the rooftop of the National Defense Building, the sunset bled across the sky, red as a wound. The last rays of light fell on the shoulders of the woman in the military uniform, standing silently, watching the vast expanse she once called freedom. The sound of familiar footsteps approached from behind. She didn't turn, but she knew he was there. Julian stopped beside her, his eyes as deep as the fading twilight, carrying a universe of unspoken words. He quietly took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was a small gesture, but it seemed to soften the evening chill. It's getting cold, he said softly, his voice tinged with a deep sadness. No matter what, I wanted to wait for you, here. She tilted her head slightly, a rare warmth flickering in her eyes. After years of pain, this was the first time she had heard his voice without a trace of command or arrogance, only simple sincerity. How long are you planning to wait? She asked, half joking, half serious. Until you're not lonely anymore, he replied, his gaze unwavering. Or until I no longer have the breath to remember you. She let out a soft laugh. It was a sad sound, but beautiful. You haven't changed. Still using words that make it impossible for anyone to stay angry. She turned to face him directly. Her eyes were no longer the cold gaze of a general, but held the warmth of a woman who had once loved to her very core. If there ever comes a day when I return, she said, her voice as light as the wind, don't bring me gifts, just bring me your whole heart. Julian froze. All the gifts he had ever brought her, the necklaces, the watches, the gowns, had been thrown away. He had thought it was a sign of hatred, but now he understood. She had never wanted material things. She had only ever wanted one thing, the sincerity he had lost so long ago. They stood there in the twilight, in the silence. Nothing more was said, but between them it seemed as if all the misunderstandings, all the pain, had been carried away by the wind. She gently took his coat from her shoulders, folded it carefully, and handed it back to him. You should go home. It's going to be a cold night. And you? He asked. I still have work to do. She smiled. Yes, this was still the world of a general, not of Mrs. Thorne. He nodded, not trying to hold her back, just standing silently as he watched her walk away. Her strong silhouette slowly merged with the dying light of the sunset. The wind blew past, carrying the faint scent of jasmine, a fragrance that had once filled the nights he held her as she slept. He closed his eyes, and the memories washed over him, gentle and painful. People can forgive, but they cannot forget. Some loves are only recognized as the one and only after they are lost. She was once his wife. Now, she was the person he would admire for the rest of his life. Under the setting sun, one person left, and one person stayed. The distance between them was two worlds, but it was also one heart that had once beaten in unison. In the end, love was no longer about possession. It was about one person standing in the background, silently keeping a promise. I will wait for you, even if you never come back.